So once again, good morning and good afternoon and good evening in some cases. Hello, my name is Stephen Balkam. I'm the founder and CEO of the Family Online Safety Institute, and we're delighted to welcome you to today's forum on children and the importance of play, both online and offline. For those of you who are not familiar, FOSI is an international charity that works to make the online world safer for kids and their families. We convene leaders in industry, government, and the nonprofit sectors to collaborate and innovate solutions and policies in the field of online safety. Unfortunately, we can't be together physically this year for our annual European Forum, something we've done every year for going back 10, 11 years now. But we have done the next best thing in assembling together some of the foremost thinkers and experts on play from the UK, as well as a leading pediatrician from the United States. Hopefully next year, we'll do this in person. So 2 weeks ago, we held a webinar that featured a fascinating conversation focusing on the mental health and well-being of teens online, particularly during this pandemic. And I strongly encourage you all to take a look if you missed it. In fact, I'm going to ask a colleague to put it up, put the link up in the chat down below here. It's a really interesting conversation. And that panel discussed the challenges and opportunities that living online presents to teenagers. And one of the main conclusions was the importance of building connections and communities. So today, we are shifting our focus to the under 13s. How and indeed should they connect online? How can we harness the benefits of technology to allow them to play and develop skills, especially during a year when they haven't always been able to see their friends, hug their grandparents, and even play on the swings? Today, this panel will explore how this younger group is playing, growing, and socializing online, and how we can ensure their safety while doing so. Now, in 2018, the American Academy of Pediatrics stated what many parents and teachers already knew, that play is not frivolous. Instead, researchers found that play promotes essential social emotional skills, as well as cognitive, language, and self-regulation skills, skills necessary for healthy development. Through play, children develop and come to understand safe, stable, and nurturing relationships. Today's discussion is incredibly timely, therefore, and necessary as European governments have recognized this reality and are acting to prioritize children's online safety. In the UK, for instance, the Children's Code comes into force in September. The code defines children as anyone under 18 and applies to services, apps, games, websites, and social media which children are likely to access. These services must design their products with the best interests of the child in mind. We also saw the launch of the draft online safety bill in the UK this month. The bill aims to make the UK the safest place in the world to be online and imposes a duty of care on many tech companies. The impact of these regulations will be felt around the world. So we often say that no one entity can solve online safety alone. The most effective actions require collaborations. And so we talk about the need to create a culture of responsibility, one in which we all play a part in building a safer online experience. We need enlightened government policy, fully trained law enforcement, robust industry tools, resourced educators, informed parents, and most of all, empowered young people to make wise decisions about what they post and what they view online. So with all of that, we are thrilled to have some of these voices on our panel of experts here today to examine the importance of play, how the pandemic has impacted the way that children play, and what more can be done to support healthy childhood development and pro-social behavior through online, offline, and hybrid play. Oh, I forgot to mention before we start, one quick note on logistics. Please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I will do my best to get to as many of them as possible throughout this discussion. Also, the webinar is being recorded and will be available to view at FOSI.org and on our YouTube channel, I think by tomorrow. I hope my colleagues won't be upset with me if I say that, but it will be up soon, and we'll let you all know as soon as it is. So with that preamble, I would like to ask the panelists to tell us who they are, where they're from, and a tweet-length description of the work that they are doing in this space. And why don't we do this in alphabetical order with last name? I think, Nusheen, that would mean you would kick us off.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for that kind introduction and setting the stage, Stephen. First of all, I'm thrilled to be here among this wonderful group of people and looking forward to the conversation we have. I'm Dr. Nusheen Ameenuddin. I am a general pediatrician, a primary care pediatrician at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota in the United States. I also serve in the capacity as chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Communications and Media, where we have been looking at the effect of media on children, as well as how to train physicians on how to effectively and pro-socially use media to communicate with the public. I've been interested in the effect of media on children since my training, going back a good 15 years, and recently actually testified to the US Congress about the need for tightening up our existing laws to protect children online, but also to take advantage of all of the wonderful opportunities that the internet has to offer to connect and to learn. So thank you again for having me here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Richard, I think you're next alphabetically.
Right. Thank you, Stephen. And great to be here. I'm Richard Graham. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist by training, and spent many of my earlier years in training at somewhere called the Tavistock Clinic in North London, where child psychotherapy, with its emphasis on play therapy, was one of the key ways of supporting young people, especially disadvantaged young people. Inevitably, in working with young people, I got involved with the online world and the world of online safety. But I think over the last decade, I've been on a journey which has been moving via digital resilience to thinking more and more about how we do flourish online. And I think increasingly in recent years, how play is possible in all the advantageous ways play can support development, recognizing that technology will always have certain restrictions. So yeah, I feel like I'm on a journey and probably closer to a sort of public health perspective now than an online safety one.
Excellent. And that's a great phrase I'd love to return to, digital resilience. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Laura, I think you're next.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you for having me back. Actually, it's not my first time on one of these, which is wonderful. I am Laura Higgins. I'm the Director of Community Safety and Digital Civility at Roblox. Prior to joining Roblox, I was with the UK Safer Internet Centre for many years and focusing very much on safeguarding and digital safeguarding. And my whole career really has been around very much the crossover between both and very much where kind of child protection sits within both the online and offline worlds. I'm a senior visiting fellow at the University of Suffolk, specialising in digital safeguarding. And you know, my interest really in this place is around how we equip parents and caregivers and educators and young people and older teens with the skills and the knowledge to keep themselves safe, to participate in and also help to create those really healthy, positive, creative and safe environments online.
Brilliant. And it's lovely to have you back, Laura. Last but not least.
Hi everybody, my name is Rukeya. I'm really pleased to be here with you today. It is my first time. I'm here from the LEGO group, where I am currently the global lead on learning through play in the government and public affairs team. And my work there really specializes on exploring and encouraging decision makers and policy influencers on the benefits of learning through play, as an end in and of themselves, but also as a way of enhancing and developing lifelong skills that young people need to thrive in the 21st century. I have about 10 years experience in child rights advocacy more broadly, with a focus on education. And so applying that and looking at play in both offline and online spaces, and really how it fosters skills, including creativity, social emotional learning, resilience, and so on. So I'm really excited to join today's discussion and can't wait for the questions that come through. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to throw out some questions individually to each of you and then more generally to all of you. But if, for instance, I ask Laura a question and Richard, you want to chime in, please do. So don't stand back. So Laura, well, let me begin with you. Why don't you talk about the changes and differences you saw through the pandemic? How was it different for young people on Roblox?
I think the first thing we really need to acknowledge is just how difficult the last few years have been for everybody. You know, we found it all difficult, but we've kind of had to adapt to working from home and perhaps not seeing our parents, which is even difficult at our age. But, you know, when you sort of put yourself in the shoes of a young person, their whole world's gone upside down, and there's nothing before this to even prepare them, really. And so I think, you know, with Richard mentioning the resilience thing, I think we've seen that really coming through in young people. They've been remarkable in how they've adapted and been able to cope really with this very scary time for everybody, a very uncertain time. But of course, the biggest thing is, you know, for some of them, they may have enjoyed not being physically at school, but quickly we all sort of pivoted to home learning and what that looked like. But of course, you know, for young people where their friends are everything and those connections are so vital, not being able to physically be with their friends at school, not being able to go to the sports clubs they would normally enjoy, all of those kind of hobbies. So, you know, they kind of had to pivot very quickly to finding other ways to keep those connections. And so on a platform like Roblox, which is, you know, in essence, a social platform where they can, you know, be together with their friends, they can spend time sort of replicating some of those experiences that they might be having. You know, we always refer to Roblox as a bit like a digital playground with some of those different experiences. So they are still able to do things like have a birthday party on the platform, or go to a concert together and have that experience, or watch a movie premiere. You know, some of the role-playing experiences that we have on the platform have been really beneficial. But very much, you know, we've seen how they've really lent into it as a way of still hanging out in that social space with their friend. We actually did a survey last year of around 3,000 teenagers, I think. And we said to them, you know, what's the top things that you're doing on the platform? And actually number one was chatting with their friends on the platform and having those conversations. And yeah, I think 40% of them were saying that, you know, their relationships with their friends were actually getting even stronger because of COVID. They were actually, you know, spending perhaps a little bit more time together. So yeah, I think it's really been a lifeline for a lot of young people in terms of keeping those connections, being able to still have fun, socialize, and keep a little bit of normality.
Yeah, I mean, I was just, while you were responding, I was doing a thought experiment about what this would have been like had it been, I don't know, 2001, not 2021, where there wasn't the connectivity, there wasn't the ability to do what we can now do online. And I know that in 2019, for instance, a lot of people were wringing their hands and tearing out their hair about screen time, about the amount of time the kids were on screens. Where do you think that debate has gone, given the pandemic, and you know, how has it shifted your own understanding about when we talk about screen time, or for that matter, screen use?
I think I mean, certainly all of us have had increased screen time. You know, I'm terrible because I love using tech in all aspects of my life. But of course, when you're also having to have all of your meetings, you know, very few of us even have a telephone meeting these days. Everything's on Zoom or Teams or something. So I think, you know, we've all had to accept and looking at ourselves as role models, that there has been increased screen time. It brings up those conversations about what is healthy screen time, what is useful. I think even at the beginning of the pandemic, there was certainly a lot of speak about, oh no, this terrible, young people are having this increased screen time, let's minimize it. But of course they were expected to do a whole day at school. So therefore you're kind of victimizing them a little bit by saying, well, you've had enough time on your screens all day doing your schoolwork, so you're not going to have it in the evening, which of course then I think we realized was not the right way to look at it. So it's about having those conversations about what are you doing when you're on your screens? How much of it is schoolwork? How much of it is actually watching TV or reading or doing online shopping? And how much of it is just you actually chatting with your friends? I think we've, you know, particularly from where I work, you know, it's even made people look at what playing online games or video games looks like, because it's not just sort of mindlessly doing a repetition of something. As I say, you know, young people will come into our platform and have many different experiences through the metaverse, as we describe it, which we may come on to later. But this idea that they can seamlessly be with their friends and hang out, but they can watch a film, they can listen to music, they can just hang out and have a bit of fun doing something or creating an experience together. And actually, you know, realizing that's important. That's not to say, of course, that that's all that young people need. We want them to be healthy. We want them to have a good, active life. Getting out there and having fresh air and all those important things where that's possible, but it's just about having that balance. But I think it's definitely shifted our perception on that, and I actually don't think, as we start to get back to whatever the new normal is, I actually think we might continue to think differently about what screen time looks like.
So let's shift gears a little bit. Nusheen, I'd love to bring you in from a pediatrician's point of view, and maybe I'd love to get your reaction to what Laura's just saying, but also go a little further about your own shift in thinking and how you're actually talking to the families that you see about socializing, screen time, screen use, etc. Please.
Yeah, so thank you. No, I think what you said, Laura, was very resonant. I would like to make the point, though, that when the American Academy of Pediatrics first set its original recommendations for what we then called screen time, but what we're now trying to get away from a little bit and really call more broadly digital use. But even back in the 1990s, when this first came out, the American Academy of Pediatrics had found that based on some recommendations and evidence that was specifically related to increasing levels of obesity in children, we recommended no more than 2 hours of what we very specifically called recreational or non-educational screen time. And so we recognize, you know, especially in an increasing digital world, even back in the 1990s, that children were starting to spend a little bit more time online. They were using the internet to research, and we've never considered that part of the screen time recommendations or the limitations per se. So, you know, a lot of questions came up, especially at the beginning of the pandemic a year ago, when people were saying, oh, are we throwing the screen time rules out the window? And the truth of the matter is not really. You know, in 2016, we updated our policy recommendations and looked at the effects of digital media use on young children as well as older children and teens. And what we really said is, instead of setting that very strict 2-hour curfew, and again, that always referred to the non-educational, the recreational screen time. So listening to music, watching TV, you know, even as social media began to grow, engaging with friends, to really kind of look at it in the context of a child or teenager's overall daily use. Now, we realized that, you know, at the time, kids were spending about 8 hours in school, give or take. Ideally, we were wanting them to spend about 8 hours sleeping. And then so you have this other chunk of time that was spent in extracurricular activities, doing homework. And so when we said, you know, kind of let's look at this more in context of what they do, the idea was that you didn't want any one thing to impose too much on the other. So if they were spending a lot of time even socializing online, which, you know, is the non-educational screen time, was that affecting their sleep? Was it affecting their schoolwork? Was it affecting their mental and physical health? So really, we tried to put the responsibility back on the family to sort of say, okay, look at what your lives involve. What can we change here to kind of make screen time most productive? Content matters, context matters, and the quality, obviously, of the content matters. And so, in terms of answering your question of how have things changed, the number one thing that I've been telling families, for about the past year now, is that mental health is important. And, if you just need that time to kind of turn off, and we recognize that children have been staring at a screen and being expected to learn, as they would normally in person, but, with less interaction, just because of, the reality of COVID lockdowns in many different places. Maybe that's a time when they actually need to disconnect, if they can go outside, get a little bit of fresh air. But for other kids, maybe they relax and renew by spending a little bit of time connecting with friends and having lower pressure socialization, hopefully. So I've really encouraged families to look at what works best for them and what works best for their families. I have, some of my patients who love to bake, and, that is a wonderful way to kind of use their creative skills. It may not be the healthiest hobby, but it's something that gives them joy. And I've really focused on trying to get people to focus on the joy. So, again, I haven't, imposed any strict limits on people. It's really just, let's look at this in the greater context. I will say, though, that even though there is somewhat mixed evidence, even as early as the 1990s, about really how much screen time is healthy and how much isn't, the strongest recommendations really came from finding that children who spent more than 2 hours in front of a television at the time were much more likely to have higher rates of obesity. And so, even with that, we think about kids spending 6 to 8 hours a day in front of a screen for learning, for good purposes, for very important and necessary purposes. But also realizing that we have seen a concurrent rise in obesity for kids. And so it's a balance for us, I think. And I've just focused on telling families to work on the balance and do what's healthy for them, with the hopeful idea that when they are, engaging in screen time, it's something that's relaxing and helpful for kids, not stress inducing, and that hopefully eventually we can transition back to more physically, what's a good way to say this? More physically fit types of activities.
Sure. So, and I totally understand the issue of too much screen time, too much, just basically sitting there. But what about kids and families who are under-resourced? What are the issues around equity and diversity and inclusion that you see in your practice?
So that's an incredibly important question. We talk about the digital divide, which, when you look at kids from, lower income backgrounds, immigrant backgrounds, and children of color who tend to be less resourced, at least in the United States, we have found paradoxically that those are kids who probably spend more time on screens for entertainment and for other purposes. And so, part of it is because maybe they don't have green spaces, parks or safe areas to play outside in their neighborhood. So, that is frankly, a survival technique for many families, or kids whose families may not have the ability to pay for high quality childcare that's not screen based. So again, we recognize that is an issue. When we talk about digital equality, we also know that families that are under-resourced are less likely to have access to broadband, which of course is necessary now to even have school and to even learn in a basic way. And if you think about a family, if there are 2 or 3 children and maybe, 1 or 2 parents also working from home, if you've got 5 people using up the Wi-Fi, you really need, strong internet, which is oftentimes expensive. So there has been, unfortunately, this ripping open and exposing of the deep inequities that existed well before the pandemic, that were unfortunately exacerbated as a result of that. So I think the take-home message for digital inequity is, number one, those families tend to have fewer resources to be able to enjoy, outdoor sports, sports clubs, as you call them in the UK, but and safe places to just play and have unstructured play, but also will tend to spend more time online. So I think that's also part of the reason that we should work to ensure that we have higher quality content available for kids and teens. Also realizing that that is actually a primary place where people go to get health information, and whole different issue right now, but health misinformation and disinformation is something that kids and parents are coming into contact with a lot more, but that's a whole separate issue.
Well, it's interesting, as you were speaking, this is not just a British or a European or an American problem. We have a comment and question from Zubaru Jibril from Nigeria, a founder of a startup initiative that's trying to promote digital literacy amongst rural communities. The struggle that they're facing in terms of making sure that folks are staying safe online. Ruqayyah, let me come to you. First of all, I saw you nodding your head very vigorously while Nusheen was speaking. Do you want to build on any of the discussion around diversity and equity first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think really coming from a learning through play perspective, we know that online engagement fosters many of the skills that we want from learning through play for children. And I think before I even go to that, the word joy that you used, Nusheen, is really important, I think, which is a core characteristic of learning through play, and one we definitely think children are able to continue to acquire online. However, this point you made here around the digital divide is very important. And I think even in industrialized contexts where you might, for example, in the UK have universal access, for example, to internet access online in an urban setting. So not a rural setting where there's challenges there, but in an urban setting. The quality of the material that children are engaging there, the access they have, the ability and time that their parents might be able to afford them to explain certain concepts or ideas, are affected by those questions and pieces around equity. And I think that that's an important piece for us to consider. And then I think it's important to maybe also think about how we flip that on its head, right? Like if we say when we're in certain schooling environments, there are creative skills, digital skills that children must acquire. And then depending on the sort of school environment that they're in, for example, there are serious disparities around whether they can get that through curriculum or learning experiences. And then we've had children who, because of the circumstances of maybe they live in a high rise or, an environment that is more socially deprived than others, are being put into settings and environments where they are being asked and able to acquire these sorts of new creative skills and ways to ideate and share and think and imagine online. That is really important. And I think consideration needs to be given to how we facilitate that, how we encourage and increase equitable sharing and experiences in that way. And also, as I said, think about how we foster those universally. So it's very important, obviously, to consider some of the infrastructural issues that exist to kind of act as barriers to children's online benefits from playing online because of class or other kind of structural issues, but also the benefits that could have come that may also disrupt some of those assumptions we make about the ability for children who can acquire certain skills or how they play in particular contexts as well.
Good. Let's shift gears a little bit because I'd love to talk about the skills that kids gain by playing online. I know the Lego Foundation report came out with some research on tech and play. Can you talk about online engagement and how it leads to children developing creativity skills and socialization?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, maybe if we go back a little bit, learning through play obviously is characterized by 5 specific characteristics. And what we call like a playful learning experience is one that is socially interactive, is joyful, as we've referenced, allows iteration, is meaningful for children, and is actively engaging. And these things can all be present in an online experience. And as I said, as a consequence of that, there are skills that we think are genuinely acquired in learning through play experiences, whether they're online or offline. And those include social, physical, cognitive, creative, and emotional skills. And especially on 4 of those areas, social, cognitive, creative, and emotional skills, there is so much scope and space for those to be developed in online spaces too. And what we found, for example, is that through online experiences, children are developing all sorts of things. One, for example, agency. So the report, for example, noted that around up to 49% of children that we surveyed that were surveyed by the Lego Foundation for their report, aged around 3 to 11, about 49% of them express the ability to create digital online content, for example. That is an opportunity for them to test, to put these skills to use, to iterate. In addition to that, creativity more broadly, thinking about creating worlds, using their imagination. And I think going back to that point on diversity, one of the things that was interesting from the Lego Foundation report, for example, is the fact that in Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups that were surveyed, there were more likely for children to create entirely fantastical worlds totally departed from their day-to-day experience, sometimes because they might not have seen those realities reflected in the toys they're playing with. So that ability to stretch the imagination in that way is also important. And then, you know, through a lot of these social experiences that children are having online, they are forced to or enabled to foster communities of play. And so they're being able to self-regulate, engage emotionally and think about that, conflict resolution. And then, you know, all these skills are what we call and what the report has found is transferable. So they can take them from those play experiences and apply them in other areas of their life. And obviously, which is increasingly important beyond the scope of just a play in and of themselves, is use them to kind of grow in terms of those 21st century skills they'll need for later in life. But I think it's also important to think about the fact that skills such as resilience, creativity, social emotional regulation are also important in the context of this that they're living right now, this COVID-19 reality. 2020 came as a complete shock for all of us, you know, it's not to talk of a 6-year-old or an 11-year-old. And so then being able to have the space to develop, to grow these skills in that way, and use them in a way to help them grapple with, understanding, deal with what they're experiencing in this immediate moment is also particularly important. And I think online play has played a pivotal role for children from across social backgrounds and different demographies to grapple with some of those realities too.
Brilliant, brilliant. Elizabeth Milovodov has asked you, Ruqayyah, if you would be so kind to put the link to the report in the chat.
Absolutely, I'll do that right now.
Perfect. Richard, let's come to you. And you know, we keep talking about the importance of play, but what's the evidence base? Is there a body of research that dates back, I don't know, to the 19th century? Is this something that's just arisen? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably preempted in your introduction some of what I would have said, Stephen, because I think the evidence in terms of our understanding of neurodevelopment and its impact on many areas from learning and social, emotional learning and so on, it's substantial. And it really does go back to, well, probably when childhood itself was first being really thought about in terms of human development. So I guess the Industrial Revolution was probably when some of those seeds were being planted. And then certainly in terms of the development of psychology and the different models of human development from Darwin through to Freud and Piaget, you know, there's been lots of thinking and recognition that play has its important role. And I guess, I mean, coming from the Tavistock, we were very much influenced by the work of Melanie Klein, who really did see play as the child's way of communicating, of problem solving, of coping, and all sorts of extraordinary sort of activities are going on in the child's play. And And that, if facilitated, I mean, she was really interested in what inhibited play, because if there were anxieties or other restrictions on that child-directed play, and that's the really key element, and perhaps with teenagers having unstructured time, that they decide what happens within it. Those seem to be associated most strongly with those advantageous developmental processes that improve your life chances. So yeah, I mean, there's a really sort of substantial body of evidence. And that's why I think you end up getting to the point, as with the, you know, rights of the child from the UN, that play does need to be protected. And whatever we're doing in this next phase of the digital world, we need to make sure that it isn't sort of driven by rewards or gains sort of external, that play in itself should not be intrinsically motivated by those rewards. And also the sort of problem, I think, with the world of influencers and monetization, that play in the digital age can become monetized in almost a form of labor. So I'm just throwing those in there just as sort of cautions. The other thing, I was thinking back to what Nusheen was saying also about, you know, the tech was fantastically helpful, because we need to remember in COVID, it wasn't just children suffering. Many were exposed to parents who'd lost work, families in food poverty as much as digital poverty. And so those connections were really, really helpful. But we found in some of the work we were doing that whilst the connections were great, we weren't very good at helping young people manage something like how to end a Zoom call. And some of the work we did suggested that they found the loneliness worse after the end of the call than, you know, before, when they'd had that sense of connection. And the other observation I'd like to make is that, I don't know how it was for many of the other participants here, but I felt in the first part of COVID, having Teams meeting after Teams meeting, my diary was controlled by Microsoft, nobody else, and nobody could stop a meeting short of half an hour. And you know, how we defaulted to certain things because voice calls were still possible, going back to Laura's point, and having that mixed diet really of tech, I think is always a really helpful aspect of resilience and well-being. So it's just a bit of a mix of things there, Stephen.
No. Well, yes. I mean, it's funny. I have a regular call with my chair, and you know, she was relieved when I said, you know, we could probably just do this on the phone. We don't have to Zoom everything. I think that's also something for our kids to know. Let me, Dr. Michael Rich, who many of you will know, has sent this in. The Pulse survey from the Digital Wellness Lab showed that video chats on gaming platforms were the #1 way of connecting with friends. Remote schooling was good for didactic learning, but social emotional learning, or SEL, suffered. Kids went to gaming and social media platforms for their social connections. Let me ask you, Richard, but then I'd open it up to everyone else. What do you see as the outcome of free range, in quotes, SEL online?
Well, that's kind of why I was thinking about also adults were struggling during this whole period as well, and actually facilitating that learning, those sort of important, crucial skills in terms of how we navigate relationships, really key. But I thought Laura also made the point earlier on that what I guess young people were doing is trying to create playground type experiences in different spaces. And I guess Roblox was one of those. And there is then a need for industry or for us all to be kind of ensuring those spaces are as safe as we would want any playground to be, whether in a school or outside of it or in a green space, as Nusheen was suggesting. So, yeah, but I think there inevitably will emerge perhaps some impacts from the sheer amount of time. And of course, schools couldn't provide that setting for some of that learning to go on in the sort of free times. So, but I guess this was something everyone else could probably touch on too.
Let's open it up. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so I mean, I would agree absolutely. And with us at Roblox, obviously, you know, one of the things we all saw was an increased amount of people on the platform of all ages, right through from the youngest right through to people in their early 20s. And so we saw it as a huge responsibility to make sure that they were able to take advantage of the benefits on the platform, the creative side, the social, educational opportunities, all of those things, but making sure that we were providing that positive and safe place for them to do that. You know, safety is in our DNA. It's a core of everything we do. But as we've grown our community, we've also had to grow our efforts in those areas to make sure that we're kind of adapting. So, you know, we now have 2,600 human moderators around the world supporting our safety efforts, and increasing our kind of machine learning and automated systems, etc., to make sure that we're being really responsive to those new needs. But I think, yeah, just to kind of, you know, thinking about the digital playgrounds, the other thing that we saw was people recreating things that they would have been experiencing in the real world, if you like. So we had graduations happen. I've already mentioned that people were holding private birthday parties, and particularly those kind of connecting generations and connecting families globally. So particularly around holidays, you know, we were seeing people coming together who may not have even been able to do ordinarily, but actually seizing that opportunity, understanding perhaps that their emotional needs, but, you know, involved that close contact. And actually we spoke with some of our community members, and there's one, I'll share a blog post actually in the chat in a moment, from one of our community members called Jenny, and she just talked about it as a healing platform. And she talked about the fact that the community support and all of the advice and things she could get from those people around her was really helping with her mental well-being and anxiety. And I think that's been reflected for a lot of people.
Anyone else want to address this?
Yeah, so I was thinking about it from another angle, which is that I think that the remark made there really shows up something else in terms of that schism between like the didactic learning and SEL. And this is something that predates the pandemic, right, in terms of how it's been prioritized in children's learning and their experiences in school environments versus home environments. And really the pandemic showed up, I think, quite clearly why that SEL is extremely important for children to be able to access, and that what's happening at the moment is children themselves are recognizing that they need this, right? I think the examples Laura gave really demonstrate and illustrate that, and that they're currently seeking them and experiencing these social emotional learning experiences outside of the education setting, so that even when they're learning online, it is, as was pointed out, those didactic lessons, that way of educating that was, you know, happening prior to that, to the pandemic, that has kind of taken charge there. And so I think it raises an extremely important question, one that we're really passionate about, the LEGO group, really around the importance of, I guess, those sorts of skills that children need to acquire and that they need to be built in to those learning experiences in school settings, and to know that that's a continuum, right? That when children are outside of school, they're experiencing that, and when they're in school, they also need to experience that. Because to speak to another point that was made, often children in school environments would be doing that in the playground setting, the physical playground setting. They're not doing that at the moment whilst being at home. So I think that's just an important point that I also wanted to raise.
And I might just jump in if I may. So what's very interesting, and I appreciate your comment, Rakaya, about how this, you know, these concerns actually predated the pandemic. It's interesting because, like, I remember reading articles, I remember talking with colleagues about how, you know, these days Generation Z, you know, the young teens are communicating more through text almost than in person. And again, predated the pandemic. And it was interesting for me to see how, you know, some groups were lamenting that, saying, you know, do they not have are they not developing the skills of reading facial expressions, of responding to that? You know, is it just, you know, do we live in sort of a tweet size world? And so, you know, suddenly the pandemic hit, and suddenly both all of our concerns as well as all of the opportunities and potential that we saw for different kinds of communication were kind of thrown up there. And I will make maybe just a very brief point that for many kids who I actually take care of, kids who have chronic illnesses or who have very debilitating anxiety and social phobia, the pandemic and the ability to learn online was, you know, and again, I don't want to minimize the very, very, you know, difficult effects of the pandemic, but for some of my patients, that was a godsend because it sort of equalized things. They felt more normal. They were not the ones who were, not able to come to school. Kids who have physical handicaps as well, things were a little bit more accessible for them. So, I think we also, as we talk about, all of this, we have to think about how it opened so many doors to lots of kids who were otherwise marginalized for a variety of reasons.
Oh, there's endless paradoxes about this pandemic and silver linings in dark clouds and whatever your metaphor you'd like. I want to shift gears a little bit because quite rightly, we've been very focused on kids. But Elizabeth Mlovedov has sent in a couple of questions here, which I want to share with you all. And starting with you, Ruqayyah, first of all, excellent summary of your report. Thank you. What can parents do to support these skills that you mentioned to make sure that they are indeed transferable and not lost?
So that's a really good question, because I think the first thing is to ask how we empower parents to be able to do that. I think the confidence for children, that for parents to have to play with their children in these ways is an important starting point. And I think, as you'll see in the report, and maybe some others that I'll share, is that sometimes what stands in the way of parents supporting their children in that way is that gap between having the confidence and not having the confidence to do so. So I think that that's the importance. Two is socializing the idea and really getting parents to understand that play has so many benefits beyond just being a distractor or what you do to occupy the child when there are other things that you need to do. I think that's really important too. Three is that piece and understanding, especially those skills. So when in the report, as you'll see, is that a number of parents, over 50%, recognize that play, for example, is A, beneficial to their children's educational development, and B, is also benefit to their children being able to develop skills for the future. So parents are understanding that. I think that is an important thing. So they understood, around 60% said that they saw that play is essential to children's learning and development, and that it helps foster their creativity and their ability to come up with new ideas. So parents are understanding that. I think the important thing, as I said, is encouraging those co-play experiences. So parents actually joining their children in some of these experiences so they can see, how it's helping foster those pieces as well. And that should be online and offline as well. And then three, I think which is really important, is for adults, to also understand the benefits of play. It doesn't just stop when you're a child. And I think that kind of empathetic lens and understanding how it's a lifelong learning journey, and learn through play can facilitate that, also helps in terms of promoting that for children. And of course, it'd be remiss to kind of not go back to that equity piece, right? For some parents, there are real barriers that are preventing them from actually playing with their children and recognizing or being able to, I guess, activate some of those skills that they know play will allow because of work, because of other children and other kind of pieces that they're grappling with. So understanding that beyond just parents, there are hubs of support for children and in children's lives, other adults, other caregivers who play really important roles in helping children foster those skills that they get through learning through play. And I think it's important for us to create the appropriate systems of support to enable that to flourish as much as possible.
Thank you. What a great answer. Anyone else want to address the issue of getting the fruits of your research and your work out to actual parents, the ones who are dealing with this on a day-by-day basis?
Well, I might jump in on that one because I think there was a similar question about how does the AAP get this information out to parents. So I want to, anyone who has access to the internet, and again, there are issues there, but anyone who has access to the internet can go to healthychildren.org. That is the American Academy of Pediatrics completely free website where you can search topics that you are interested in. So all of that is available to you. Also, of interest, I think, to this group, my colleague created the Family Media Use Plan, which you can access. You can either Google it or go to healthychildren.org. And that kind of, helps families put together, like, what are the most important kind of guidelines, for us as a family? Like, are we going to say during dinner, no one has electronic devices, or are there going to be certain zones in the home that are electronics free zones where we just communicate as a family, or do old fashioned things like, board games or chat with each other, and that kind of helps people create, their own sort of plan where they say, okay, we hope that for 8 hours you're sleeping, for 8 hours you're going to be in school. How do you want to best use that other time? So you can actually, like, there's a nice timetable where you're like, all right, I do this, I do this, I do this, and what's left over. As for the policy statements and research, all of the policy statements for the American Academy of Pediatrics are available free of charge. There's no paywall for the policy statements. So those are kind of like a nice overview. We have some more recent ones over the last 5 years or so, specifically related to media use. We have, the power of play, the importance of play to children that anyone can access. So just, Google American Academy of Pediatrics play policy statement or media policy statement, and you can, in fact, have those easily available to anybody.
Brilliant. I think one of my colleagues has already put a link up to at least one of those resources. Anyone else want to respond to this one?
Yeah. You go first, Laura.
Thanks, Richard. So yeah, I was just going to say, I think, again, we did a survey 2019, and while 41% of parents were sort of talking about how they were starting to play games with their kids and teens, and we've definitely seen that increase over the pandemic. We know that parents are spending more time where they can, and seeing, sort of, as I said earlier, grandparents and things getting involved. But what was really striking is that when we did the survey, 58% of the respondents still weren't checking the privacy settings, the safety settings. So whilst they were joining in the play elements, which is amazing, there was kind of a missed teachable moment there, while using that moment to kind of talk about the safety stuff and the more practical sort of digital literacy stuff that could have really been usefully woven in. So I think reminding parents that, yes, of course, the play is the essentially important bit, but actually there are some other bits you could be talking about on the platforms you're using. So that's just one area for me, I think. But around how we actually disseminate this information, we know that parents are busy, always have been, increasingly so now, and feel the weight of the world on our shoulders much of the time. So actually, whilst these reports are fantastic, I think being able to pick them apart and drip feed those things into kind of bite-sized pieces is really helpful. And certainly for us, it's about the fact, we're a really global platform, as is Lego. And so how do we reach those families in different regions, different countries, get over the language difficulties? And so working with safety partners all around the world is really essential, because they can help to amplify those messages and help, parents understand what's going to be important to them in those different regions.
Brilliant. Richard.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say to Nusheen, I in my clinical work, particularly with gamers and their families, which were quite a fraught group, older than your Roblox ones, I suspect, but possibly not, Laura. The family media plan, or as it was then, I think, was just a fantastic tool, because what I found worked really well with young people was the neuroscience about the value of sleep was something they got. They could really engage with that. And then you could kind of work backwards. But it was because it was a systemic family media plan, they would enjoy telling tales on their parents' use of devices too. And it kind of became a much more sort of fun and collaborative experience. But why? I mean, I've been banging on about it for years. And I think what it highlights as well is that in our children's workforce, all those professionals and NGOs working with young people and their families, they're also struggling with digital transformation and kind of getting it. So when we're talking about digital inclusion, the professionals are definitely a group to be thinking about too.
All right, very good. And I see links are flying through the air at the moment, so thank you all for that. Got another question, this one from a good friend of ours, Rob Stoddard. What concerns, and this is for anyone, what concerns do you have, if any, as children return to in-person schools and classrooms? Is it going to be as easy as throwing a switch, or are there transition issues that must be addressed? And what elements of virtual learning can be carried into the classroom experience? Your starter for 20. Who'd like to take this one on? Laura, I'm going to pick on you. Come on.
So for us, part of the Roblox experience is about creating those experiences. So all of the immersive 3D experience within Roblox are created by our developer community. Increasingly, we work with educators, with schools, with coding camps around giving young people those sort of STEM skills to create the experiences. So it could be basic coding and all of those sorts of things. So I think those things will continue, and it's a nice crossover where young people perhaps have become quite accustomed to learning those sorts of things and being in those environments. That's still going to be continuing, I think, as they move back into the classroom. I think what I would like to see is consideration given by parents and educators perhaps about maintaining those relationships that are online relationships. So whilst we've talked about how important it is that the real life friendships can continue in an online space, but actually there's been a lot of creating of new friendships, and they can be just as important and just as valuable as being friends with the kids that you go to school with. A lot of those friendships at school is because you're thrown together, not because you necessarily have lots in common or would have become friends. And so trying to find a balance, a healthy balance of maintaining that, I think, and acknowledging that would be really good.
Brilliant.
I just, sorry, go ahead, Rebecca. Go ahead. No, please.
Okay, so I think for us as well, one of the things is around this piece on how and what children are learning. And one of the things that's happened as a consequence of the pandemic is a lot of the technological changes have been totally accelerated. And so that space has become increasingly important. Automation has become increasingly accelerated and so on. And so curriculum change is real. The need for children's learning to really reflect the world that they're living in is more important now than I think it's ever been. And so really it's the call and charge for policymakers to recognize that and help complement existing learning priorities and education priorities and curriculum with those new pieces that need to really kind of be scaffolded around and on top of that, to recognize the world that children are living in, the skills they need to acquire to be able to function and thrive in that world now, but also to prepare them for the future. And I think that remains an important kind of concern and opportunity that we think is there as they return to school. And obviously we passionately believe learning through play helps to facilitate that, but really it is about recognizing the need around those skills and social emotional learning, creativity, resilience, the importance of iteration and so on, in helping children become learners for the future, and be able to thrive in the world that none of us really know what it's going to look like in the years to come.
Nusheen.
Yes, so thank you. I think both of you made excellent points. I wanted to actually give a quick shout out to the technology and adolescent mental wellness group that my colleague, Dr. Megan Moreno, who also served on the AAP Council on Communications and Media with. We actually had a symposium just, I want to say 4 months before COVID really became part of our lives. So, her group has been really looking at ways to leverage technology to enhance and improve wellness, mental health wellness, particularly in teenagers. And so, Laura, what you said about these connections that kids make online, the friendships are just as real. I mean, that's true for teenagers, it's true for adults as well. I once had another colleague say something like, oh, well, social media is not real life. And that's not actually true. It is real life. It may be a highly a stylized part of real life, but it is very much real life. And it's interesting because I think that we would do children and each other a disservice by suggesting that it's not real life. There is always a human on the other end, and I think sometimes that is harder to to keep in mind when you're not seeing a face, when you're not seeing a person, reacting in real time emotionally to conversations. And I remember that was a debate that started when email started to come out. Are people a little bit more harsh online because they're just typing and there's no reaction? So, all of these things I think are things that could and should be built into the curriculum, as Rakaya was talking about, because it is just a reality of the life that we now lead. Again, well before the pandemic kind of threw everything into very sharp focus. But to the original question about, do we need some sort of a transition period? Do we need to ease kids back in? I think it depends on the child. I mean, there really is not a one size fits all approach. I think some kids have been raring to go back to school, even kids who were quite happy. And I was just doing a very informal, completely anecdotal poll of my patients, over the last year, okay, do you prefer learning online at home or do you prefer going to school? And early on, it was interesting. A lot of kids are like, yeah, I don't have to get up as early. I can, be in my pajamas. I can, have snacks at home. There aren't, there isn't this policing that goes on that there is in school. But, as the pandemic wore on, I think that became less of a novelty and kids really started to miss those in-person connections. But many were actually doing a remarkable job of staying abreast of these, connections online. And so going back to Dr. Moreno's tech and adolescent wellness program, I remember the question coming up at that time, again, just months before our whole lives changed, about how, well, if parents are setting rules that are too strict, that are not letting their kids get onto social media platforms, are they somehow holding them back? Are they somehow not letting them develop? And I don't think there's one straight answer for that. I think, there's a lot that needs to be considered. What I've always advised in my practice, for the last decade or more, is that, parents be involved early on. If their children decide to get involved in social media, that they have full access to passwords and accounts, that they're, able to sort of help their child navigate these areas. And then as the child, becomes 18 and takes on more responsibility, then parents can sort of step back a little bit. But to really always have parents there in a mentoring role and in sort of a coaching role, as well as having the ability to jump in if or when things get out of hand or unsafe.
Excellent. Richard, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I probably want to speak to your world a bit, Nusheen. Really just that although in theory we've all been in this together, actually certain communities have experienced devastating losses. We've seen it very powerfully that COVID has reinforced all sorts of inequalities. And so I think one of the head teachers I was speaking to is bringing a trauma-informed sort of practice to her work. And a lot of that is just really listening and letting the young people speak about what their experience is. And then, as you also indicated, Nusheen, some who are more anxious and have health anxieties, again, are still struggling with coming out of lockdown, as we're calling it in the UK, and the media reporting, right from Wuhan through to now, still has a rather dreadful clickbaitish sort of quality to it that is traumatizing. So I think each child is absolutely different, but I think in our urge to recover from all of this, we shouldn't forget what's happened along the way, and some have paid a heavier price.
Excellent point. And actually, Richard, I'll use that to segue back to your mentioning of digital resilience earlier on. Unpack that term. What is it that what does that actually mean for you? And in practice, how do you try to promote it with the folks you work with and so on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I should say that the concept of resilience, is very widespread, and certainly in child and adolescent mental health has really been around for over 30 years, because we've always known the level of need was greater than we could possibly meet. And if anything, at certain points in history, the factors that worsened the mental health of young people were increasing. So there was an interest in learning from those that could sometimes have better outcomes from disadvantageous backgrounds, and trying to work out what those factors were that played a part. What we've been doing in the UK is trying to then take some of the learning from all those bodies of research and recognizing that young people on the whole are remarkably resilient. They have that urge to master, to develop, to learn, and to think about how we harness that, but also help them think about those opportunities to sort of discuss and process what they've been experiencing. So going back to the return to school, I would think a great thing schools could do is create some space for young people to just simply reflect upon and process with, safe, respected adults. Teachers are hugely important in the lives of young people. And then recognize, when people are crossing the line into something that is more like a health disorder or condition, understanding how to seek help, and also, recognizing that personal factors, you can make a difference to your safety and well-being online, which isn't to let industry off the hook, especially Laura on this occasion, but to recognize we can still do something ourselves. And actually you feel better if you do something. We have a concept in health called patient activation, which is for people with long-term conditions like diabetes. You can leave it to the doctor completely, or you can actually do things that make a difference. And it's that kind of thinking really, which is actually building on that innate desire for agency, to have an influence, to achieve, etc., and applying that in the online spaces. So yeah, just not letting people sink into passivity and hoping someone else sorts it out completely. If that isn't too extreme.
Not at all. Not at all. Anyone want to follow up on that, or should? No? Okay.
Yeah, I will. Just one quick thought on it, because
Sure.
I mean, you're right. And, resilience looks different in different places and with different people. It is a skill that we all need, but obviously sometimes it comes from, exposure to really negative things. Sometimes it comes from a gradual build up and having the right amount of support to kind of test things, but it not necessarily being harmful or risky. And of course, that's where, I think our duty of care is still to ring fence, so that people can, young people can still learn and get those experiences, but without putting them at any risk of harm. But actually, I was having a conversation with a colleague a couple of weeks ago, and they used the term stamina. And I thought it was a really interesting way to put it. So, on one hand, you need to build this resilience, but actually to learn how to have the stamina to manage these things, because quite often, as I say, if resilience is coming out of negative experience or pressure, you don't want them actually to be dealing with that over a long period of time. But actually just having this kind of being able to deal with things, I think that's probably what we've seen demonstrate through the pandemic. It's been going on, and we weren't sure when there might be an end. We're still not sure. It's looking hopeful, and I'm sure that we're all praying that it's going to be okay. But I think that's one of the things to actually acknowledge, that it's more than just that, oh, we're going to get over this blip, or you need resilience to get over that particular thing, but actually having something that's a bit more level and that is sustainable for a longer period of time, I think is quite interesting.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, and by the way, keep your questions coming in. We'll try and address as many as we possibly can. I want to shift gears again a little bit, because at FOSI, we talk about the 3 Ps of policy, practices, and parenting. And I want to spend a moment now on policies and I guess the broad notion of government legislation, regulation, and so on. The UK has been particularly active in this space, wanting to be the safest place in the world to access the web, which I put in air quotes because I'm not quite sure if geography is the right way of doing it. But we have the online safety bill. We've got various other things that have been enacted or coming through. How well, let's start with the British government. How well is the British government doing in this space? Or put it another way, what else do you think needs to be done from a public policy point of view? And actually, I'm going to start with you, Richard, simply because you're non-industry. I know sometimes industry would prefer government not to be around this space.
Yeah, I'm probably going to end up in a tower somewhere in central London as I start, Stephen, because I do think, I mean, one of the sort of insights from the digital resilience work is that if you talk about safety, it can disempower the end user in terms of actually thinking about what they can do. However, I think, and Laura's already addressed this, a greater duty of care. And I think that does include, and this is where play is important, a recognition of not just resilience, but digital well-being, about how we do ask those who are developing products, who have established platforms, to be really digging deep, both in terms of whether supporting research or understanding from all the data they have themselves, what it is that also leads to better life chances. I mean, we talk a lot about the benefits and the risks and the harms. This isn't, this has been going on for decades now, and there should be greater acknowledgement of what it is that is going to promote those better outcomes for everyone. And also, and Ruqayyah and Nusheen have touched on this, also looking at the disproportionate impact on certain groups. So, no one's left behind and no group suffers greater than any other. And if, our online harms bill can really grapple with all of that and actually look to a better future. So it's not just safer, I mean, because in a sense, safety can be boring unless there's something occurring in those safe spaces. So don't know whether that's much of an answer, but it is work in progress.
Okay. Now, would Ruqayyah or Laura like to reference? I mean, is the online safety bill the right answer to this question? Are there other things that need to be incorporated? And for that matter, we haven't even touched on, for instance, the rights of the child, that concept as well. Okay, why don't I ask you first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think really to kind of build on that point, Richard May, which is really important to us, this kind of question of digital well-being, and that being two sides of the same coin when we're thinking about safety and when we're thinking about well-being, and how policymakers help to create an enabling environment for children to experience well-being and flourish in online spaces as well, I think is particularly important in this space and time. And we have to consider the fact that increasingly when we're thinking about this, children are aware in some senses of what it means or what safety looks like online. And so really, how do we build on that for, again, good digital citizenship, which I think is really important and should be a priority of the government moving forward, and something we're passionate about. We are, of course, extremely passionate about children being safe online, but again, using it and building on those experiences to foster skills and well-being is particularly important to us as well. And I think going back to that rights of the child piece is really quite critical, because we know obviously one of the biggest rights in the Convention on Rights of the Child is the right to play. And I think then we need to really think about what that looks like in real terms and how policymakers help to facilitate and enable that to happen. Safety, of course, being a very core component of that, and then building around that with the well-being piece, I think is also particularly pertinent as well.
Mm-hmm. Laura.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is such a huge topic, and these are conversations that have been going on for 4 or 5 years now. That we've all been, attending meetings with the government and sort of talking about what the online harms bill should look like. I think it is positive. I think tech companies, some have been better than others in their duty of care, and I think it kind of puts it into sharp focus. I think it's helpful for people to have very clear guidance on what's expected of them. And so also we have the age appropriate design code coming in, which comes into effect in September, and I think that's again really helpful and kind of taps into those rights of the child, because actually their right to privacy and protect, to learn about even what happens with their data, they're really important things for young people. The UK have always said that they want us to be the safest country in the world online. I think that's a difficult ask when we're talking about international companies, and so there's a bit of, I think companies are really willing to engage with these things, but it has to be looked at much more broadly than just the UK. One thing I think is sometimes less helpful is it's very scary for parents. Whilst it's trying to come from a very protective place and is there to protect the users on the platform, you know, it does kind of boil down to the really big, scary harms. So they will be talking about extremism and radicalization and grooming. And actually for parents, that really panics them. And so I think, you know, if we can try to get away, whilst of course it's important that we're tackling those huge, huge issues, but actually, you know, reassuring parents that actually down to the minute detail, this is about ensuring that your children are, you know, their well-being is being considered on the platforms, that we are sort of, you know, empowering them and helping build that resilience in ways that we're giving them tools and things like that, and the education things that happen. It needs to be really meaningful, I think, for it to be effective. One thing I think that's been missing right from the beginning is actually involving young people in the discussions, and hearing from them what they would like to happen as well. But, you know, that might happen later on. And the final one, which kind of, I think, Nusheen, you touched on earlier, around how curriculum needs to change in light of this. And so, yes, Rakaya, you know, you mentioned the sort of digital literacy skills. They've always been there, but we've never really made that core subject. But thinking about the things we need now, the misinformation, how do we understand what is credible information online, all of those sorts of things has never been more important. So I'd like to see a bit more focus on that, as well as just the kind of regulatory side.
Brilliant. Nusheen, I see you smiling. Now, you recently testified to a congressional committee on these topics. We're obviously talking about UK law. Where do you think the US government is on all of this?
So that's a great question. And I have to say, it was just wonderful to listen to this group. You know, I feel like you're probably part of tech platforms that are perhaps more magnanimous. You know, during this conversation, I was thinking about how, you know, Facebook wasn't created to protect children. Instagram wasn't created to protect children. It was created to generate revenue, and more clicks generate revenue, more outrage generates more clicks. And so, you know, this environment of misinformation and disinformation, which again is nothing new for us, has really fueled you know, just this crazy I guess phenomenon where people can go deep down the rabbit hole and find not necessarily accurate information about health, about politics, about so many other things. So I just want to make a quick point, and then I'll answer your question, Stephen. The importance of media literacy, which we now really call digital literacy, is so important. And the AAP also has a policy statement. It's a bit older, but you're welcome to look at that. I will also say that when we looked at the effect of digital literacy, it did have you know, a benefit on children, where, you know, teenagers who had some training in digital literacy were a little bit more resistant to advertising messages. So what's interesting is, like, you know, I think perhaps fundamentally the US and the UK are a little bit different in this area. Those of you who are Americans or who've spent time in America know that we love our freedom, and this has always been sort of you know, been framed as, you know, don't take away our freedom. We have the right to do anything we want. Sometimes I think at the expense of protection, especially of more vulnerable communities, including children and teenagers. So, you know, in the United States, we've had the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which is, you know, about 20 years old. And as everyone here knows, digital platforms and technology have changed significantly over the past 20 plus years. And it is in dire need of updating or perhaps completely reforming. We don't currently have you know, a law other than COPA, but that's something that the American Academy of Pediatrics has been advocating for, particularly in our digital advertising statement that came out in 2020, actually, again, just before the whole pandemic hit. So if you want details about what we recommend as a group that is dedicated to children's health and welfare, you're more than welcome to look at that. So really the question is, okay, how do US laws compare to UK laws? I think for many years, and again, even before, you know, technology had evolved to the degree that it has right now, we have been advocating for for stronger laws, and we do rely on our policymakers for that. We've also more recently been saying that this onus that has traditionally been placed almost solely on parents and children to be more media literate, to, you know, limit the amount of screen time they have, for lack of a better word, is really just not sustainable or possible when you live in an environment that is so tech saturated, where you really can't look to the left or the right without being bombarded by some type of advertising. So we really are shifting focus to say, of course, this is multifactorial. Everyone has a role to play, educational systems, families, but really, you know, I think the greater onus needs to be on tech companies. And so we are appealing to our legislators to hold technology companies more accountable for the type of design that basically gets kids to just click and click and click and keep them engaged almost endlessly, again, generating more clicks, generating more revenue, but to really step back and say, please don't target children. And we really say, no one under 18 should be targeted by ads, and information shouldn't be collected online. And again, you know, even as much as, you know, Americans value our independence, I think the privacy part of it has pushed more people, you know, and in a bipartisan way to say, yeah, this really is something that we need more oversight on.
All right, thank you. So that's our first P. The second P, of course, is industry best practices. What more could companies do? Where are companies doing well, but particularly looking to the future, what would be your wish list for what companies could do to provide for not just safety, but literally for well-being within this space? I'm going to call on you, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, I've been interested in this, as I said, for a few years, and I see Craig from Super Awesome's amongst us, but certainly talking with Super Awesome about how one does achieve that. One of the examples that I find really interesting at the moment is the model that the streaming app Yubo has been developing, where it has completely, or as far as I know, stripped out any opportunities to become an influencer or to monetize your experience within that online space. And that, for me, creates something closer to that unstructured time of hanging out. I mean, I know in theory you could do this with Zoom and lots of other platforms, but I do think some of the commercial factors, as Nusheen has addressed, are, in fact, I was asked, you know, what would I remove? And it would be that more than likes and followers and all those other metrics that might have an influence on well-being. Because what I was picking up in the consulting room was young people wanting to engage in that sort of industrial activity of doing something with a purpose to be ultimately being successful in the digital economy. So having some spaces where you just take the pressure off, where you're not having to achieve for a time and can just be, perhaps play a simple game or a complex game or just talk, that for me is something that I think we need. So I'll stop there.
Brilliant. And by the way, those of you from tech companies can certainly respond to this about other tech companies for that matter.
Yes, of course they will.
Well, I would come back very quickly, something that we've been working on for a couple of years, and I think it's really shaped some of the product design features that we have, that are certainly some of the safety and civility things, but it is about listening to the community. And so when it comes to this conversation, you know, myself included, I've worked in online safety and safeguarding for many, many years, and we can make assumptions about the tools that we need to keep the platform safe. And you know, as I say, we're always looking at how we can improve those and innovate in those spaces. But that's just the things we know, and actually going and talking to the community and finding out what's going on for them, some of which may not actually be happening on our platform. This is where that whole duty of care, which we think, you know, our community actually has a whole world outside of Roblox as well, you know, we may not be able to fix all of the things that are happening for them, but being able to acknowledge them and listen and to play our part as well. So whether that be having, providing access to resources that might be helpful for them, or, you know, giving young people a voice, as per the Wellbeing blog that I shared earlier, and just saying, you know, you can speak your truth because it might really resonate with other people in the community. And I think that's just so important wherever possible. And it's amazing for us, actually, because, you know, we never stop learning. And sometimes the things that we find out from the community can be either shocking or surprising or joyful. But just to hear those really kind of keeps us moving forward and not just stuck in one place.
Mm. All right. Okay. Well, let's come to a little bit of a conclusion here by getting to our third P, which for me is always the most important. It's parents and how they deal with it. First, a question from Daniela Santabanez. I hope I said that right. Where can parents get inspired with good content and good games for their children besides Common Sense Media Ratings? What other sources can offer parents around the world positive and engaging apps and games according to their age? Any quick responses? Yes, Laura.
UK, our industry trade body here in the UK, have something called Ask About Games, which is a fantastic website where people can, does exactly what it says on the tin. But Andy, who actually runs that website, has very recently written a book for families called Taming Gaming. And he has this incredible database where you can go in and search for all types of different games, experiences, things to play as a family. I'll share the links in the chat. Also on a more European level, when I was with the Safer Internet Centre and the European network of helplines and hotlines, there is also a website that's got international access to services and resources. So I'll put the link in for that as well.
Brilliant. Anyone else got any resources you want to share? All right. Well, listen, I think this would be a good place to bring this to a close. I mean, some of the phrases that are going around in my mind are things like digital resilience, leading to digital well-being, hopefully bringing us to some concept of digital citizenship going forward. The other thing that's been going around in my head is, for those of you old enough, Cat Stevens wrote a song way, way back called "Where Do the Children Play?" And in the song, he's bemoaning, you know, the skyscrapers and the roads and everything that's taking away playgrounds. But he could quite as easily have written that song today, but more from an online perspective. And I just think the way in which we answer that question will be very important for our children's well-being going forward. I want to thank you all. What a great, great panel. What fantastic contributions. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our wonderful audience and the great questions and comments that kept coming through throughout the time. I just want to put a shameless plug for our own annual conference that's coming off November 15th in Washington, D.C. in physical form at the Intercontinental Hotel right on the water at D.C. Wharf. It's going to be a fabulous event. But of course, being 2021, it will be a hybrid event, so it will have an online presence as well. But for any of you and any of you who can make it in person, we would love to see you then. And I just want to also thank the great FOSI crew that's been behind all of this and got all of this together. Yes, round of applause for all of them for making this happen. We will be posting this video, I'm fairly certain by tomorrow. We'll also be sending out an email with links, both to the video and some to the other links that we've been referring to today. So thank you all very much. See you out there and online, and be well.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.